Hokulani Aikau is Kanaka Ōiwi Hawai'i, Director of the General Education Office at UH Mānoa, and Associate Professor of Indigenous and Contemporary Native Hawaiian Politics in the Department of Political Science here at the university. Her current research is a collaborative project with Kāko'o Ōiwi, working to restore kalo in Ha'eia ahupua'a. She is the author of A Chosen Land, A Chosen People, Mormonism and Race in Hawaii, and she inspires me in her continuous strive and her success as a triathlete and a gifted bartender. So. Sharing too much. As the pictures come up, I do want to thank Lisa and the Ethnic Studies Department and all of those who helped to create the Ethnic Studies Department. It really wasn't until last night that it occurred to me. I mean, I think that there was something there already that I've been thinking about that was sort of tickling the back of my head. That the work that I'm doing now was a part of this sort of larger project. I've always known that the project that I'm doing now is part of a larger project. It's very much, I'm entering into and becoming a part of a genealogy of mobilization and activism that growing up in Utah was very, very far away for me. So being able to speak about my work with Ha'eia today, and learning last night from Daviana McGregor in her tribute to Pete Thompson, who recently passed, enjoying many ancestors, that this work, that my being here today is really a part of that. And thinking about Cully's question about the future and the presentations that we had last time, it's about being very clear about what my responsibilities, my kuleana, is in the academy, and how we move our work forward in a way that honors our ancestors who have come before us, the students that we're going to train, that we are training today in a way that is fundamentally different than the way I was trained and the way that we were trained, those of us who have come before. And then to envision an alternative future that can potentially imagine race not being there. I agree with Damon completely that in the future that I see in front of us, the one that if we continue on the path that we're following now, race will constantly be there. The racialization and racial formations that subordinate us, that make the compass, that the cardinal compass, the dominant one, right? And that's not the one I want to follow. I really do want the positional, directional compass that is absolutely in relationship to the world that we live in, our human and non-human ancestors, and that's what this research that I've been doing has allowed me to sort of see and to get to. My comments today then come from this project that I've been working on with Kāko'o Ōiwi. Okay, this research has been sponsored by Sea Grant. I am required to say that, and thank you to Sea Grant for supporting this research, because again, the work that we're trying to do is really trying to challenge the way that we think about land, conservation, climate change, right? And so that's where my sort of comments about the way that racial projects continue to manifest themselves is going to sort of come back to. So I've been working with Kāko'o Ōiwi in Ha'eia. Here's just a sort of punch out of where that is if folks are unfamiliar. It's in the moku of Ko'olapoko on Oahu. Here's an aerial photograph looking Mauka at the ahupua'a. In the foreground is the fish pond. Right, and the nonprofit that has been working to restore that fish pond for the past 15 years. It's called Pai Pai o Ha'eia. In the light green grassy area, that is the wetland, and this is where Kāko'o Ōiwi has been working since 2010, officially 2010, to restore that wetland to productive kalo cultivation, specifically utilizing the lo'i, the wetland terraced taro farming. And then Mauka, there's even more projects taking place in that ahupua'a. Papahana Kua'ola is another I would call a Native Hawaiian resurgence kind of project. And then further Mauka, actually sort of adjacent, in the adjacent Ili, is Kuleana parcel, Kuleana family land, that they're also doing resurgence kind of work, restoring our land-based practices through the restoration of lo'i. Let's see. The name of the project that I've been working with is Mānoa, the restoration of food, I means food and hoi, on these lands, which was historically, Kanaka Schultz described it as the calabash, one of the many that we've had, but one that nonetheless, until just recently, was productive for food and hoi in the region. And recently, like, you know, I was in a meeting the other day, and someone's like, oh, that Hawaiian stuff was ancient. And I'm like, 1950s, not that ancient, right? Like, this wasn't very long ago that we were doing these practices, that the land was able to feed us in a very abundant way. The objective of Kāko'o Ōiwi through Hokulani is to restore, again, productive lo'i farming in the region. I forgot to push my camera. And this image, this photograph from the 1920s, is really sort of is held up as being the image that the organization shares with community volunteers as a way to inspire people to, you know, to be able to see what this was and how it could be again. And it does take collective action to make that happen. Here is, okay, so in the foreground is my son. And this is, I think, two of the earlier lo'i that were started, that were opened up. We now have approximately 4 acres of lo'i that have been opened up and restored, and they're also working right now on conventional gardening practices as well. As a nonprofit, of course, one of the challenges is maintaining, you know, funding for these kinds of things. It's incredibly expensive, and so we're doing conventional farming of plants that can be sold to restaurants as well as the lo'i. So Hei'ia, and this is where sort of, and the work that I've been doing is like contemporary ethnography of this restoration project. So for the past 4 years, you know, we've been going, my family and I, as well as my students, my undergrad students, graduate students, have been going to work in this lo'i and to document this process of restoration. But this process of restoration is just the most contemporary moment of work that's been happening here. And again, what I learned last night, and from the work of Pete Thompson, who I now have to learn more about and get to know, really began and was made possible because of the mobilization and activism that happened in the 1970s, and then again in the 1980s, and specifically into the 1990s. This is the aerial photograph of what it looks like now off of Google Earth. But what it was originally planned, slated to do in the 1990s, was to turn it into a Hawaii Kai. And here's this is again Google Earth photograph of what Hawaii Kai was. Without the mobilization and activism from the 1989-90s, it would look a little like this. So I overlaid Hawaii Kai onto Hei'ia. And so what we would have had the activism, had the community not come together, had ethnic studies faculty not mobilized their resources here at the Academy against this development project, we would have had the wetland would have been dredged. We would have had, you know, condominiums, boat docks, harbors, adjacent golf courses, and this is what it would look like. But it's not there yet. And I'm going to actually not hold us, so I've got a couple of thoughts now from thinking about what this work has done and how it's shaped my thinking about race. But the place I want us to think on it and to hold is this image. So how have ideas of race and processes of racialization shaped and continue to shape Pacific experiences? And I've been thinking about this question, and I think about race as I do growing up Hawaiian in Utah. You know, where it was like, and I was in a community in Utah that was like 99% white. And on my street, there were 5 Hawaiian families. That was no accident, it was on purpose. But so, so the contrasts were always very, very clear to me. And when I went to the University of Utah for college, it was ethnic studies classes that really gave me a language to explain my experiences growing up Hawaiian in Utah. And also a fair-skinned Hawaiian, right? Color matters. My sister was very dark-skinned, and it was clear what the differences were, right, between us and the way that we were treated by institutions and the people who manage those institutions, like counselors, teachers. So race has always been an operative frame for me. And so in my current work and what I've been thinking about lately is that relationship between settler colonial logics that structure or underlying notions of things that are happening and the way that people talk about this restoration project. And specifically in the language of climate change, one of the things we hear often is, we need to build the capacity of communities in order to manage their resources. Or, we need to make these ecosystems resilient again. And the way that we do that, is by incorporating new technologies and bringing in scientists who can help us understand how, sea level rise will impact our ability to grow kalo, which I think is all true. We do need, that new technology can be useful and we can harness that. But when it's premised upon an idea that somehow communities lack capacity, I argue that that's kind of a racial logic there that says that, and taking what Ty and Jeff said very seriously, that we have had projects. I mean, part of the colonial project was to deculturalize ourselves, right? To make it very difficult for us to be able to maintain our cultural and land-based practices, right? And yet, I think we have been deculturalized, but we can also reculturalize ourselves. And when they say we lack capacity, that's a racial logic that we're buying into. And I don't believe that we lack capacity. I think we lack our connection to our aina and our ability to farm again. When we have access to our lands, we can farm, we can relearn the practices of our ancestors, and it's through those actions and our connections to land that capacity grows even stronger and bigger. Resilience. I think, again, looking at the Lo'i systems, I'm fascinated by the technologies that we came up before science even existed, right? Like science is trying to catch up to what we already knew. And that to me is like really cool. Like our ancestors knew stuff and they exist in a kind of environment where innovation, ingenuity, creativity, failure, right? Because we got to fail in order to know what didn't work so we can make it better, right? Was really cherished. And so how do we create those kinds of conditions of possibility? My place that I'm working from is the academy. So how do I create those kinds of conditions of possibilities for my students so that they can be creative and show some ingenuity and innovation that exceeds my potential for possibilities? So race matters in the kinds of discourses that are used to think about climate change. I think race matters. It's racial logics that underline things like, who's entitled to have access to places like, public lands. What does it mean to balance the interests of the state with the interests of Native Hawaiians? I'm sorry, I don't want that to be balanced in some sort of economic equation. I'm not going to buy into that. And I don't want my students to buy into it either. So the analysis of settler colonialism, for me, a theoretical lens, we can use to, again, sort of dismantle those assumptions and to really pry them open. And then finally, how does engaging indigeneity help us to reframe the privileged positions of race or thinking about ethnicity? And here I'm echoing the words that like Ty and Jeff were saying this morning and others, that it does require us to reframe, and indigeneity, and specifically indigenous resurgence as a framework, does help me to reframe the privileged lens of race and ethnicity by shifting the terms of engagement from one situated within a Western ontological model And that Western ontological model, as David said, is an imperial one. It's one that colonialism used to subjugate us. It's one that's used to categorize, compartmentalize, and to divide us. In thinking about this, I'm also reminded of the words that were spoken last night on the 7-minute video of Aquan Mickelrath, who said that we have to come together. We're stronger together than we are apart. And race as a category of differentiation wants to divide us. Imperialism, colonialism, and settler colonialism rely upon race, racialization, and racialized logics to divide us and to keep us fighting with each other for a piece of their pie. These structures have us believing that we actually might want a piece of a pie. And once we begin to identify with and shape our desires around our piece of the pie, settler colonialism no longer requires the exercise of state violence because it's enlisted us, Indigenous peoples, to identify with and to become complacent with, implicitly or explicitly, with the profoundly asymmetrical and non-reciprocal relations with the state. Shifting from race to resurgence, I think, requires us to be attentive to how the pie promotes acculturation through dispossession, expropriation, and exploitation. Quite frankly, I don't really want a piece of the pie. Rather, Indigenous resurgence provides us with an alternative model, one that begins with the recognition of a prior and co-present ontology. It reminds us, and by us I do mean all of us, who need the life-giving waters of Kane, and for our Aina to be Momona again in order to live in this very Pai Aina, that the Kupuna and Akua had different theories and methodologies for living here in this place. And I think Indigenous resurgence emphasizes that positionality, that relationality, that responsibility, and gives us a new direction to point our canoes towards, I think, for an alternative future, one that isn't predicated or requires race to be operative at the center of that, and perhaps one that I think has the ability to hold us all in a way that the contemporary Western, the current Western ontological model just does not. So I wanted us just to focus on this particular image because I think this is what's at stake, right? If we want an alternative, and I would argue for an Indigenous futurity, it has to be one that envisions an alternative vision for the future for our children's children's children. And as now a grandmother, that really is very concrete and material for me in a way that hadn't been before. So again, I'm really grateful to ethnic studies for the work that it has done in the past, for my ability to be a part of that work now, and I hope to carry that legacy forward into an alternative futures. Thank you.